Bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and I'm joined by Nana Akua today on your TV, radio and online.
Now, it is Wednesday today, which means it's Hump Day, the middle of the week, and our weekly viewers special. We'll be discussing the stories that you, our viewers and listeners, have said matter to you.
Yes, all week we've asked you to let us know what you want us to talk about today, and you have not disappointed. But don't stop there with your views. You can carry on sending them in on GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll try and get to as many as we can throughout the programme. First, here's your latest headlines.
Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Commuters are facing significant travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations across the country. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running today. Some places have no trains at all. Travellers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. The RMT Secretary-General, Mick Lynch, told us that the government cuts are to blame.
He wants massive cuts. When he wanted the railway workers to keep working and put themselves in a place of danger, in effect, he wanted to talk to us. Now he's using COVID and the effects of COVID as a reason to cut back on the railway. He's cut £2 billion worth of funding from the National Rail, and he's cutting £2 billion from London Underground, in effect. Now that's causing massive disruption, and it's that funding cut that he's responsible for that is causing these disputes. If we can get back to a proper funding level and he allows the companies to negotiate properly, we will get a settlement to this dispute. But he's got the key.
The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, was listening to that interview. This was his response.
I just absolutely gobsmacked watching that interview. He said, we haven't provided support. The taxpayer provided £16 billion of support, £600 for every household. Every one of your viewers watching has paid £600 from their household to keep every railway worker in a job, not even on furlough, during the coronavirus. There are employers and there are unions. They're the only people who can settle these strikes. This is just a game they play in order to divert attention from the fact that they are the ones calling the strikes.
England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alicia Russo and Fran Kirkby who all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats in the final four of major tournaments. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. Now, MPs are accusing Rishi Sunak of making a U-turn after he pledged to cut VAT on domestic energy bills if he becomes Prime Minister. Unveiling his new winter plan to tackle inflation and the cost of living crisis, the former Chancellor said he'll scrap the VAT if the price cap exceeds £3,000. The announcement's been criticised as Mr Sunak's repeatedly accused Ms Truss of offering unfunded tax cuts. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, told us he welcomes Sunak's change of strategy.
The reason he's doing that is because he's under pressure. He knows that his tax-raising agenda isn't working. To me, it seems strange that anybody could aspire to the Tory leadership, essentially advocating tax rises, but that's up to him. But I think he suddenly realised that he's on very dodgy ground there and is now flipping back to saying that VAT should be abolished or reduced on energy bills. That's the fairy tale, and I think he's come very late to that party.
The Foreign Secretary is promising to publish police league tables if she wins the leadership race. Liz Truss will also ask forces to cut crime by 20% and, as she says, spend their time investigating real crimes, not Twitter rows and hurt feelings. Ms Truss said her government would make sure that homicide, serious violence and neighbourhood crime are all reduced by a fifth by the end of this Parliament. The US Justice Department is investigating the former President Donald Trump in a criminal probe following allegations he attempted to overturn his 2020 election defeat. The Washington Post says investigators have been interviewing former White House officials, including the former Vice President Mike Pence, about attempts to overturn the election result. Donald Trump returned to Washington last night, making his first speech in the Capitol since leaving office. Well, the former president hinted he may run for office again in 2024.
I always say I ran the first time and I won. Then I ran a second time and I did much better. We got millions and millions more votes. And you know what? That's going to be a story for a long time, what a disgrace it was. But we may just have to do it again. We have to straighten out our things.
Marcus Rashford is urging children to find their voices in a special edition of the kids' comic The Beano. The England and Manchester United striker encourages children to build a team of friends who have fun with and speak up for what's important. For every copy sold of this special edition, 20p will be donated to the Marcus Rashford Book Club to help children access reading material. The flight jacket worn by American astronaut Buzz Aldrin on his historic moon mission has sold at auction at over £2 million. The jacket was used during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. It's now the most valuable American space artefact ever auctioned. It shows Aldrin's name tag above the mission emblem and the American flag. The jacket was purchased by an anonymous bidder. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Queer on your TV, radio and online. And it's our weekly viewers special today. It's Wednesday, which means everything we're discussing today is based on what you've told us matters. So here's what's coming up.
Now, so many of you have been in touch expressing your frustrations about yet more rail strikes. We'll be looking at why the strikes are happening, how long we can expect them to last, and what the government is doing about it.
Yes, and we've had many messages as well from you at home about the leadership debate. Of course, last night was halted when the host, Kate McCann, fainted live on air. We're told she's now doing well, thankfully. Well, we're going to be putting your questions directly to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. So email them in, put Ask Tom in the subject line, and we'll get you the answers you want.
And our inbox has been filled with "It's coming home." Yes, emails after last night's semi-final for England in the Euros. The women are in the Euros. Now, we don't want to jinx it, but we'll best not. But we'll be looking ahead on to Sunday's final. And as we wait with bated breath to see whether England can lift that cup.
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well across the programme. And get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we will get to your views throughout the show. Now, our summer of disruption continues as we face another day of rail strikes today, with train services operating at 20% capacity, as all operators will be affected.
More than 40,000 RMT union workers at Network Rail and 14 train companies are walking out. They're leaving thousands of passengers stranded at stations all over the country.
Yes, well, earlier, GB News spoke to Manuel Cortez, General Secretary of the Transport Salaried Staffs Association, which is a different trade union, to ask why railway workers are striking. Here's what he had to say.
The Tories have created a very deep cost of living crisis, and some of our members have not had a wage increase for 4 years. The majority haven't had one for 3 years. And clearly the purchasing power is being eroded on a daily basis. So what they're doing now is taking a stance to make sure that they don't lose out again.
Meanwhile, Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT, spoke about how the relationship between Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has deteriorated.
Well, he wants massive cuts. When he wanted the railway workers to keep working and put themselves in a place of danger, in effect, he wanted to talk to us. Now he's using COVID and the effects of COVID as a reason to cut back on the railway. He's cut £2 billion worth of funding from the National Rail, and he's cutting £2 billion from London Underground, in effect. Now that's causing massive disruption, and it's that funding cut that he's responsible for that is causing these disputes. If we can get back to a proper funding level and he allows the companies to negotiate properly, we will get a settlement to this dispute. But he's got the key.
How have you felt about the way Labour have been dealing with these disputes, the way Keir Starmer's been talking about it? He says that if there was a Labour government, they would get round the table and try and, grease the wheels of the negotiations and get a deal struck. But he's explicitly told members of the Shadow Cabinet not to come on the picket lines. How have you felt about the way Labour's management have dealt with this?
Well, as a member of the Shadow Cabinet here this morning, and I believe that many Labour MPs are on our picket lines right across the country in their constituencies. I don't know what Keir Starmer's doing. He doesn't phone me up and tell me...
Would you like to see more support from him, though?
I would like to see more support from Keir Starmer. I think he needs to support working class people, because working class people are struggling in this economy right now and have been for nearly a decade. Public sector workers are struggling, and also private sector workers. So he needs to ride that summer of solidarity that we're seeing with many trade unions coming into campaigns and actions. People want a square deal from corporate Britain, and they're not getting one. And Keir Starmer needs to stand up and identify himself with our campaign and the other campaigns in the economy at the minute. I think he should do that, and it will do him some good in the working class communities that lost out in the last election and who lent their votes to the Tories but can be won back for Labour.
Well, so many of you have been in touch to share your thoughts about the strike action today. Alan, for example, says they should get back to work. They're mostly well paid and making people suffer for their greed.
But Ken writes in to say the strike is not just about money. It's also about terms and conditions.
Yes, well, keep your views coming in to us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. It's quite split, actually, in terms of what people think about whether it's fair that they're striking or not. We will try and get to as many of your views as possible.
Right, our national reporter Paul Hawkins is at Euston Station in London for us. Paul, good morning. What's the latest there?
Yeah, morning, guys. It's a lot quieter now than it was just, really throughout the morning since 6 a.m. There's been a lot of people here, a lot of media. Obviously, a lot of people here, including, as you heard there, Mick Lynch from the RMT, also Manuel Cortez from the TSSA. They're the other union that are joining this strike action. So it's been busy here this morning, but a lot of people have filed away now. Inside the station, frankly, there are more journalists than passengers at the moment because only 20% of trains are running in England, Wales and in Scotland. So very few trains running in and out of the station, which only opened at 7 a.m. this morning. It'll be closed around 6:30 this evening. A lot of trains that are travelling long distances to other parts of the country, such as to Edinburgh. They'll depart from London at 2 o'clock. So very, very scaled back services. And as you've been talking about on the programme, the dispute really hasn't moved on from the initial round of strikes that we had about a month ago. They are still at loggerheads here. They want what they consider to be, the unions want a fair pay settlement. They want a pay increase in line with inflation. They're not talking about above inflation, but in line with inflation. And they also want the terms, and they don't want terms and changes to terms and conditions attached to that pay settlement that the government or Network Rail and the rail companies are offering. So we're talking about things like making staff work permanent nights. That's what the unions are claiming, that in order to get that pay increase, that a lot of their staff members will have to work permanent night shifts, and that's not something that they signed up to in the first place. So This agreement it's ongoing. There's no sign at the moment of it ending anytime soon. We've got more strikes on the way on Saturday. Another union, ASLEF, that represents rail drivers, 5,500 of them are going on strikes. There'll be more disruption to the rail network on Saturday. And then in August, on the 18th and the 20th, the RMT are going on strike again. And on the 19th, RMT members on Transport for London on the Tube will go on strike. That's a separate dispute, but they will also be going on strike as well, because the RMT say they're unhappy that Transport for London haven't let the union see a draft agreement between Transport for London and the government over a pay settlement. Transport for London continuing to get bailed out by the government because they're short of money. They're looking at a long-term financial arrangement with the government. The government, also, of course, will have strings attached to that money, and they haven't told the RMT about what that agreement is. So the RMT are unhappy with Sadiq Khan and Transport for London about that strike date, the 19th of August, but more strike dates to come in August and indeed on Saturday with ASLEF as well. So no signs of this dispute ending anytime soon, although both sides say they are open to talks and negotiations.
Well, yeah, thank you, Paul.
Paul's out there, and yes, same birthday, Jinx as well. Paul, keep us posted.
Yeah, it's quite a miserable time, isn't it, for anybody who's trying to travel in any sort of way. If you're driving somewhere, the fuel costs are through the roof. If you're trying to fly, there's cancellations at airports and things. You can't get across the channel, or in one way, you can't get across the channel if you're trying to go from the UK to France. Rails, I mean, we might just all have to get on our bikes.
No, just holiday in your house. I'm having a holiday in my house. That'd be quite interesting.
Let's go to some of your views. Hazel says, I feel sad that our country is being held hostage by the unions when we are all struggling. There's only so much money to go around. I'm a pensioner and get £7,000 a year, nothing more. I'm not moaning, as I just manage. Some people are just greedy or want to bring the government down.
Interesting. Well, I've got one here. AK, I'll say AKM, AK McCormack, you know it's you. Can't be doing with these bullying strikes, holding the general public to ransom. More than obvious it's political, as all union bosses say, is this Tory government, like they're spitting out a bad taste. Updating how the railways work is vital, not unlike the NHS, which also needs modernising. Just like the eco-warriors, no idea how to get the general public on their side. Sack them all.
Well, we've got a couple of interesting views, which I'll probably read later on when we have more time, because they're quite longer ones, but they're from people who've actually worked on the railways, and they have very strong feelings about in support of these strikes. They think the government's telling lies, basically. But in the meantime, let's go to Jim, who says, I do support the strikes, but on the basis that everybody should have the human right to withdraw their labour under management provocations. There should be regular negotiations, of course, but striking must always be in the arsenal of workers. And I think that's what lots of people will be worried about, that the Tory government, especially the new Prime Minister who comes in, when they're trying to put their stamp on the Premiership, might chip away at those rights that workers currently have to strike. That's what a lot of people will be worried about.
Well, and I think there are some services, for example, the police, they can't strike. I think there has to be sort of an equilibrium somewhere where you can complain, but you can't hold the public to ransom, because I think that's going too far, and you'll lose support. And if you lose support, then, you know, that doesn't work so well in your favour in the long run.
Yeah. Well, clearly there's no easy answer to this, is there? Because it would have been found already and we wouldn't be here. But keep your views coming in. What do you think should happen? gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. But after the break, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, answers your questions about the Tory leadership contest. So keep them coming in. You can email in, Ask Tom in the subject line in your email if you want to put a question to Tom. That's all after the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A fresh start to the day for many of us, but a sunnier start, I think, compared with the last couple of days. Still, though, the cloud will build and there will be a few showers by the end of the day in many spots. High pressure's moving in, so that's keeping things mostly settled, but not entirely sunny or entirely dry because, well, the air is still relatively unstable at the moment, and so the air is rising. It's going to produce some cloud through the morning and early part of the afternoon. So after that, a bright start, actually, the cloud tending to build up and fill in, and a few showers developing, particularly through central southern England, the Midlands, northern England, and further showers to come for northern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. Away from any showers, actually, there will be some bright spells, and it will feel warm with light winds, 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18, 19, perhaps 20 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England. Into the evening, and the cloud tends to thicken further across central parts of the country, and further showers will develop. North Midlands into northern England as well as North Wales. They'll move north, and then either side of that, some clear spells, but actually for many it's a cloudier night, and as a result it is a slightly milder night. Temperatures 15 to 16 Celsius in the south first thing, 12 to 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We start off with the early cloud across northern England and North Wales, drifting into southern Scotland, and then further showers will develop across central Scotland, particularly over the Grampians, for example. Also, by the end of the afternoon, some showers start to emerge for West Wales and the southwest. But for many, it's a bright day away from the showers, even a sunny day in the southeast. And the southeast sees predominantly sunny conditions through Friday and Saturday, increasingly warm as well, whilst the rest of the country sees cloud and some showers.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 10:22 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Queer on your TV, radio and online here on GB News.
Now, if you want to join us, don't forget you can get in touch with all the latest. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews, or you've seen our Twitter page, you've seen YouTube. You can also download the new GB News app.
Well, the second head-to-head Conservative leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss was cut short last night after the host, Kate McCann, collapsed on stage. Thankfully, she is now apparently well.
Now, the two candidates to be our next Prime Minister clashed over the NHS, the energy crisis and tax, with Liz Truss accusing ex-Chancellor Rishi Sunak of being morally wrong over his hikes to national insurance and corporation tax.
Yes, well, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is here to answer your questions about the Tory leadership race and about any policies they're proposing. But, Tom, firstly, you were at that debate yesterday. Just tell us what happened, because it ended up being rather more dramatic than they would have anticipated.
Yes, now, I must say I was in the spin room rather than the studio, so we didn't see what had happened. And it was really quite a shocking moment, because you had the campaign teams and the supportive MPs of each camp sitting there in the spin room, journalists from all sorts of publications as well, and sort of hearing the noise, and the room just went completely silent. You could see everyone sort of look around, not really know what was going on. I walked over to one of the campaign teams who, of course, were talking to people in the studio room because obviously their candidates were there, who then informed me pretty sharply what had happened. But at first we thought, hell, has something crashed from the ceiling? It sounded like a lot more than a faint.
Kate,
but I
yes.
suppose, I mean, we know the perils of microphones, right? I mean, these things can make smaller things sound a lot bigger. And I think that's probably what happened, but it was a really concerning moment there for a few minutes for everyone in the spin room.
But she is apparently doing well now, so that's the most important thing. Let's ask you some questions from our viewers, directly from our viewers. We have Jennifer getting in touch, saying, one question for Tom. The VAT cut on energy bills for a year, which is something Rishi Sunak has now proposed. She says, really? The Tories have already raised them. The energy price rise is their fault. Is Jennifer right there?
I suppose it depends what you mean by that. Yes, there are levies on bills, for example, the green levies, for example, VAT, but those aren't new. They haven't come in recently. Those have been in part of bills for a very long time. So there hasn't been any government intervention to raise bills directly in recent years. What people might complain about is the lack of domestic supply, for example, the lack of homegrown energy sources that might well be putting bills up because we're reliant on these international markets. But it's true to say that the price rise that we're seeing for energy bills is mainly coming because of global price rises rather than specific policy. The criticism of government policy when it comes to energy bills isn't that the government has made them more expensive, it's that the government could make them less expensive by taking off the tax already applied.
Well, hasn't Rishi changed his mind, though? Because he was speaking with Kwasi Kwarteng and saying that, no, it's the wrong tax to cut, it's the wrong tax to cut, and suddenly he's cutting tax.
Yes, certainly. Just a couple of months ago, Rishi Sunak actually stood up at the dispatch box of the House of Commons to say that it would be wrong to cut VAT on fuel bills. Instead, he wanted to do this subsidy that was more targeted at low earners, whereas, of course, a VAT cut would affect everyone, would give everyone help, and he was saying that that was the wrong way to spend £5 billion. Well, now he seems to have changed his mind. I suppose if you were being a bit cynical, you might ask, what is it about being more than 20 points behind the tax-cutting Liz Truss that have urged you to change your mind on this issue? But certainly he's made a calculation here that he does need to be seen to do more to help people with their bills, and tax cutting is the way to win over a Conservative audience.
It's almost like getting votes is more important to them than principles. So maybe.
He's changed his mind, though.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's over this since this thing began.
Yeah, it's
which
a bit.
Not a good look at all.
Well, if I remember correctly, Tom, you're quite pro-fracking. Am I right?
Yes, I think that.
Because Sean says, are you glad the two candidates supported fracking, Tom?
Me personally, well, from a personal perspective, I do think it's a little odd that we have these restrictions on shale gas exploration that actually mean that the kind of digging that you can do in England with regard to fracking is actually less than the kind of activity you can do on a normal building site. The way that they measure how the ground might move as you dig in, actually, you have a tighter seismic range when it comes to shale gas exploration than you do for any other kind of construction. So even if we were to just equalise that in terms of the different kinds of construction that goes on, that would be a more rational policy. But yes, I do think that it was probably a positive sign that we saw both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss last night say that if local communities support it, they wouldn't ban fracking in the UK. Of course, that's undergoing a review right now. Right. We're sitting on a lot of shale gas, and it is something that, not immediately, but in the medium term, could bring down energy prices too.
Right, now there's been a lot of questions, so lots of people ask this question. Is there any chance Boris Johnson can stay on as Prime Minister? A lot of us want him to.
Well, under the current rules of the Conservative Party, which of course are set by the 1922 Committee Executive, he cannot stay on. The fact that there is currently a leadership process going on that's already underway means that the Prime Minister has resigned as Conservative Party leader. That process has begun. And under the rules of the Conservative Party, if you've resigned, you cannot then stand to replace yourself. So he's excluded under the current rules from replacing himself. There's some speculation that he might want to come back in the future. There are many historical examples of people who were prime minister, then it was someone else for a bit, and then someone else came back. I mean, we only have to look at Disraeli or Gladstone or Pitt or Wilson or Churchill. I mean, there are lots of historical examples of people coming back. But I would, unless there is a dramatic change of rules in the middle of a leadership contest, there's no way Boris Johnson will stay on.
It would also just be very, very bizarre and a bit tone deaf, I think, if that were to happen. Which leads me actually on to the next question I have here, which is, will there be an early general election when the new PM comes into office?
Well, that's entirely within the gift of the new Prime Minister. There's no constitutional norm that there must be. There's no automatic process that there should be. But since the repeal of the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, it is within the gift of the Prime Minister to request an election of the Queen. So if the new Prime Minister decided that they wanted to have an election at any time between now and about January 2025, they could. However, I think it's very unlikely. Given that this new Prime Minister will have just got in, we've got some rocky times ahead economically, the new Prime Minister, whoever he or she is, will probably want some time to deliver policy before an election is called.
And actually, this is one from me. Obviously, we had that Fixed Term Parliament Act, which did what it said on the tin. It fixed the term of Parliament. Now that that's been repealed and it is in the gift of Prime Ministers to call general elections, when it's how long do you think the Conservatives can get away with leaving it before they call a general election? Because they might be looking at the polls in 2 years' time and saying, actually, this is a really bad idea.
So I have it on relatively good authority that the candidates have actually asked this of the constitutional experts to see how long they could physically go. And there are statutory limits. Because the Fixed Term Parliament Act has gone, that means that you can't call a snap election without a two-thirds majority in Parliament. That requirement is now gone. So a snap election can be called at any time. But a Parliament still has a definite time limit. And that's 5 years from the time of the last election.
Okay.
So this Parliament can run up to the 12th of December 2024, but if a Prime Minister really wanted to stretch it, they could wait until the 12th of December 2024 to call that election and then have perhaps a 2-month election campaign, and that would take us through to 2025 for the election. Although the received wisdom right now is that a May election is more usual in our constitutional settlement, so perhaps May 2024 is the likely aim. If they really wanted to stretch it, they could take it for about 6 months further.
I think they'll take it for as far as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you. He is a political genius, as you can tell. So we hope he's answered your questions to your satisfaction. And he will be joining us a bit later to talk more about everything that's going on in politics. But coming up, we're going to be talking about council homes and all things housing, because as you well know, there is a council house shortage and people on the lowest socioeconomic bands are really struggling to actually find housing when they can't afford to rent. So that's all coming up after this break.
It's 10:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Commuters are facing travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations across the country. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running. Some places have no trains at all. England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane. Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Elsie Rousseau and Frank Kirkby all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats in the final 4 major tournaments for the team. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. The second head-to-head leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss came to an abrupt end last night after the host collapsed. Kate McCann fainted whilst live on air, forcing Talk TV to cut away from the studio. Will Talk TV say that Kate is fine, but the rest of the debate was cancelled. Before the incident, the candidates had clashed over tax, with Mrs Truss criticising Rishi Sunak of hitting the public by raising national insurance. The flight jacket worn by American astronaut Buzz Aldrin on his historic moon mission has sold at auction for over £2 million. The jacket was used during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. It's now the most valuable American space artefact ever auctioned. It shows Adrian's name tag and the mission emblem and the American flag. The jacket was purchased by an anonymous bidder. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.207 US and 1.189 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,428.13 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Oh, good morning. It's 37 minutes after 10 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's To The Point with Mercy Moroki and myself, Nana Akwe.
Yes, now it seems harder than ever before to get onto the property ladder. The average UK house price is now £281,000. And in the last year, the cost of living crisis has pushed house prices up even further.
Now, tomorrow, the Office of National Statistics releases new figures on housing affordability and disposable income.
As well, as we wait for those numbers, we've sent our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis to meet a 104-year-old great-great-grandmother who's lived her entire life in the same £250 Nottinghamshire home. Here's what he said.
Elsie Alcock has lived a very full life, 104 years to be precise, and every minute of it, she's been right here on Barker Street in Huthwaite. Born upstairs in June 1918, before the end of the First World War, she's made a lifetime of memories here.
Oh, that's me up backyard with my first two grandchildren.
Living with her son Raymond, who's 75, Elsie knows every inch of the home, so much so that she can walk around in the dark.
He always says when I'm going upstairs, put a light on, Mother. What for? It's funny, but I can't every step I go up.
Elsie's coal miner dad first rented the Nottinghamshire home for 7 shillings and 6pence, and when he died, Elsie and her husband Bill decided to buy it. The cost was £250, money they didn't have, but the local council helped the couple with the cash. Elsie still has the book she used to pay off the 10-year loan.
CWA OCO and EOCO. Monthly payment was £2.16 and a penny.
In today's money, Elsie paid about £5,000 for the house. But if she sold it now, the two-bed terraced house would fetch around £80,000. Housing is one of Britain's biggest challenges. The government needs to build 300,000 new homes a year, but is falling short. Prices are soaring. Low stock is one of the reasons for the rise. This week, the Office for National Statistics is releasing its figures for housing affordability, analysing prices and income. Near to where Elsie lives, the District Council is trying to replenish its social housing stock. But Councillor Tom Hollis says the right to buy scheme, which means tenants can eventually buy their council homes, makes the task challenging.
All this estate was built by the council. Now we have less than 40%. And 22,000 houses across Ashfield has now become less than 7,000 directly owned by the council. Yet we've still got just the same demand. We want to give those people good places to rent. But when somebody can buy the house, you lose that stock forever.
In June, Boris Johnson promised to extend the right to buy scheme. His resignation and a new Prime Minister may alter those plans. Back on Barker Street, Elsie's home becomes worth more every day. But the memories she's made here are priceless. Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Now, Will's report actually touched on whether if you've tried to get a council house, the chances that you're going to have to wait quite a while.
Yes, indeed. Well, one of our viewers, Maureen, wants to know this. Why aren't there enough council homes? She says that growing up there was never a shortage, but now the waiting lists are long. Why can't we just build more? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, it's a big question, but according to Charity Shelter, council housing in England is at its lowest rate in decades, and that's since 1991. There's actually been an average annual net loss of about 24,000 social houses. So joining us now to discuss council homes in more detail is Councillor Richard Livingston. He's a former Cabinet Member for Housing and current Chair of the Planning Committee at Southwark Council. Thank you very much for joining us, Richard. Why can't councils just build more council houses?
Well, some councils are. In London over the last decade, we've had about 6,000 council homes that have either been built or on the way to being built, 2,500 of those in Southwark. So Southwark is very much leading on doing this. But the big challenges are, you heard a little bit there about the impact of right to buy, but actually the biggest challenge, I think, for a borough like Southwark and many other London boroughs is the ability to get hold of the finance to be able to build. If you are a private house builder or if you're even a housing association, you can borrow money on the basis of what your return's likely to be in the future. If you're a council, you're told, no, this is your borrowing limit, you can't borrow above that. So I think we'd be great if government could have a look at this and say, well, actually, is there a way that we could allow councils to be able to borrow on the basis of what their future rent is, because that would help kickstart house building.
Wasn't Liz Truss talking about getting rid of all these quotas, because there's lots of quotas to build things and housing? Wasn't she talking about that?
Well, I think the problem with what's being talked about with the government's quotas is the quotas are there to drive up the numbers of homes being built. If you get rid of the quotas, the danger is that nobody builds. Everybody agrees there needs to be more housing. Lots of people don't like the new housing being built near them. And so the challenge is that might just lead to fewer houses being built. So I think we need to look at how we free up the system. How do we enable councils to build? House building in this country was at its highest levels when councils were building and private developers were building. We need to get back to that mixed economy rather than just relying on the private market to build homes.
And talk to us a bit about the replenishment of council housing stock when people buy their own council homes, because it has been the policy of the Conservative government really for 50-odd years, that they want people to be able to afford to buy their own council house and become home owners. But the problem has always been we then don't replace those homes that people buy. What is the current sort of replenishment rate for homes?
Well, I mean, the big challenge there is every time a council home is sold, if it's in London, it gets a discount, 116,000 on the price of it. It's actually valued often on the basis of what the home is worth if it had a sitting tenant, rather than being an open, empty home on the open market. So that takes more money off it. So you're talking effectively of taking about £200,000 often off the price of a council home, and that means that the money the council has left at the end of that isn't enough to get enough homes built. And I don't have any problem with people exercising their right to buy, but I think it should be government that's replenishing that money. If it wants to give that discount, it ought to be giving that money back to the councils so that councils can build the housing stock to replace it.
Do you think that perhaps people shouldn't be allowed to buy their council houses?
Well, I think we need to look again at how the rules work, because the way it works at the moment just is, it's disastrous, as you've heard from the councillor in Ashfield, for how social housing works. I mean, you've got this big problem. I can go to the council estates in Southwark and I'll find somebody paying a council rent of about £150 a week, and their next door neighbour in the same block, same type of property, can be paying 3-4 times that amount because they are renting from the person who bought their home. And about half the council homes in Southwark that have been sold for the right to buy are now privately rented out. And so, we've got a system which is, it doesn't work any longer.
Well, it's making a lot of millionaires as well. I mean, if you're lucky enough to buy your council house in the right area, then you go and sell it, then you can become a millionaire. That can't be right because the state is actually supporting you. Perhaps the rule should be that you can't actually buy.
There was a programme on a few years ago called the £1 Million Council House, which actually tracked somebody who had bought their council house and then for a low rate, obviously, at a discount, and then ended up selling it years later and effectively became a millionaire. So that kind of thing is very common. I know you're a Labour man, so I don't expect you to support the Conservatives' current sort of immigration policy, but we have had views in here talking about what the role of population growth is and whether the government, successive government's inability to sort of get a hold on immigration numbers has led to problems like this. Is there any truth to that?
Well, I mean, we know that London's population has grown, and that's for a number of reasons. It's not just immigration, it's also people from across the country who decided to move into London. We've got a city which has now got 9 million people living in it, when 20 years ago it was 7 million. And so that has certainly created a big part of the pressure there is on the housing market overall and the pressure there is for council housing. But that's certainly not just about immigration. That's lots of reasons that have brought people into the city.
And very, very briefly, a lot of people, sorry, promised I wouldn't do that. A lot of people talking about the fact that there is this mass migration and what plans that the government have to house a lot of these people, because ultimately a lot of them will end up staying in this country. Are there any other plans to kind of look after refugees and housing?
Well, I mean, this is slightly outside my area of expertise, I think, and I think that has to be something that's looked at a national level rather than something that a local council can deal with. I think what's important for us as a local council is we have got, even though we're building council homes, we have 16,000 people on the council housing waiting list in Southwark. Most of those for a priority reason because they're homeless or overcrowded or got a medical need. So we need to find the solutions that can build those homes. And those are all people that are on the council waiting list that have been through the process which shows they have an absolute right to be here. This is not about people who've got any contested right to be in this country. These are people that live locally, that have an absolute need for a council home and need one. And if that's the problem in Southwark, you can multiply that across London. So we need to find solutions which are building those homes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and discussing that. It's obviously an issue lots of people care about, and especially with these leadership elections taking place, lots of people will be sort of looking at Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to see what their policies are to solve problems like this.
That was Councillor Richard Livingston. Thank you for joining us, Richard.
Now, let's go to some of your views very quickly just before we move on to the next thing, which is going to be the Women's Euros. Lots of you excited to talk about that. On social housing, Rob's...
Well, I've got a great one for Paul, actually, because she said she's been trying... this one's from Brett, sorry, saying, I've been trying to get social housing for 2 years as I rent a room, and my disability has now got to the point where my disability has been ignored to the point where I may end up in a wheelchair. And where I rent my room has stairs and no wheelchair access. Thursday, when I chased the council up, they asked if I was a British or an immigrant, hence the reason I was asking that question. He says, I was born in Britain, the same as many parents, and have been dealing with the council for 2 years. But if they allocate all social housing to immigrants, coming in on boats across the channel and the back of trucks, and social housing is under the right to buy scheme. Basically, you can have a cheap house and buy it cheap if you're an immigrant, but if
Yeah,
you're
I mean,
British,
that's just not
that's
true.
his
That's
call.
just, yeah,
But-
it's
but
not
that-
true.
But that is a sentiment that people
It's a sentiment, but that's categorically not
Well, no,
true.
but that's
That
what I'm
councils
saying.
do not prioritise housing
Richard
based on your
did say
immigration
that.
status.
No, Richard did say that, but that is a view that a lot of people have.
Well, we can now go to our top story, or our next story, rather, but it is a big story, certainly, for many people. Could it be finally coming home? Well, England have made it to the final of the Women's European Championships with a 4-0 victory over Sweden.
Now, the Lionesses will face either France or Germany in the final at Wembley this Sunday, so many of you have been getting in touch and are already getting excited for the next game.
Yes, well, Ron got in touch to say, what a fantastic team we have in the women's England football. They make me so proud to be English. That's Ron there.
Well, Ian sent us this lovely message about the example these women are setting. My 2 young daughters now love the game, playing and watching whenever they can.
Yeah, so can the Lionesses actually do it? Well, here to talk about this in more detail is sports journalist and broadcaster Aidan McGee. Aidan, I'm really interested in that final viewer question we read out there, because it has been really inspirational for young girls. Suddenly, I think they can see that young girls can actually play football.
Well, that's what has to happen next, Mercy, because at the moment it looks very top-down. It looks as if they're building the bricks at the top. They're generating interest for an England team. The club game's getting a bit stronger, but crucially, they're not playing it enough in schools. And sooner or later, this generation of players will pass on. There needs to be something or someone to fill the vacuum. And when you're talking about multiple leagues, you're talking about international teams to feed, you're talking about a whole pyramid, you're going to need a lot of people to do that. We had this problem back in the 80s, and then North Atlantic Soccer League in America, they brought over Franz Beckenbauer, Pelé, Rodney Marsh, Sir Bobby Moore, people like that, to try and generate a soccer league, a men's soccer league then. Now, those players were all senior, that had big careers in Europe, but again, sooner or later, after 2 or 3 years, they disappeared from the scene, and it failed financially because there was nothing coming through. Now, let's hope that with the saturation of coverage that we've had, and don't forget, they've benefited enormously because the Men's World Cup has been delayed, the Wimbledon's over, there's no Olympics this year, so they've been very, very intelligent about the scheduling and the timing. They've been putting, the BBC haven't really had anything else to put on peak time, so let's put the women's football on and see what it got. 7 million the other day. Absolutely extraordinary. They could never have dreamed of numbers even like that a couple of years ago. And I've seen the kind of growth since 2015 in the World Cup. I didn't think it would grow exponentially as it has done, but you have to create stars out of these people as well. So that's where the top-down bit comes in. You've got to make these people famous. You've got to make them recognisable in the street, someone to latch onto.
Now, what about the concept of men and women's sports? Because I know my daughter, she likes a bit of football, but when she was at her school, they were saying, oh, the boys and girls can play the game together. Now, is there an issue with that, or are these mixed teams the way that it's moving forward?
You can do mixed teams. I mean, GBNews have a football team, and it's male and female. You can do that. I was at Sky with the same
mixed
thing.
Toilets. I'm not happy with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? It seems like in this channel. No, but still, more seriously, yeah. Look, I've seen it happen. But if you're going to progress girls to the women's game professionally, they have to be playing separately. Now, the facilities are available. The WSL is really strong. I'll tell you why the WSL is working at the moment. It's because all these football clubs have financial fair play rules to adhere to. You can effectively offset that bill, like you can a tax return, by investing in the women's game. That's why Manchester City threw up a stadium and a training ground. That's why Chelsea have invested heavily. That's why Arsenal invested heavily, because they'd all overspent in other areas of the business, and they can use this to claw some back. So it's a win-win situation. And as I say, I've covered loads of women's football in the last sort of 5 years, and it's getting better and better. Yes, there's still a bit of way to go in terms of the standard. If Sweden are second in the world rankings, then frankly my aunt is a giraffe. But having said that, England did not give them space to breathe last night, and I thought that was going to be a real problem in Sweden.
I can see it now, exactly as you say, that if you make these women stars and make them, then I can see that would be quite encouraging. It's very encouraging to hear young people saying, wow.
Yeah. But I do want to, play devil's advocate here, because I've had 2 separate conversations with men over the last couple of days and asked them, oh, are you watching the women's footy? And they said, it just feels so slow because I've been so used to watching men's footy, and it feels like you're watching it at half speed. Do you think a lot of men will feel that actually feels a bit slow?
Absolutely. Well, Sweden were very slow last night, which is why England smacked them all over the Bramall Lane. However, there's a big difference in speed between male tennis and female tennis, but also, Mercy, it's going to get quicker. It will. Look at men's football 20 years ago, or not 20 years ago, probably 40 years ago, when England won the World Cup in 1966, they're almost playing at walking pace. So it happens exponentially. The demands and the competitive nature of players coming in from overseas as well, that will drive up the standards of the women already here. And so they're going to get faster, same as athletes get faster in all disciplines. And that will improve. And it will create a good spectacle, because, I mean, there was people... Fabio Capello, I was at a conference with him 2 years ago, and he said, oh, you've got to make the goals smaller. I mean, that's really patronising for a start. But secondly, I mean, we couldn't believe he said, "Oh, we have to make the goals smaller," and everyone's looking around going, "Yeah, that kind of stuff is nonsense." So that doesn't matter. That's not an issue anymore. No one's even discussing that. So the players will get faster. This generation will be technically inferior by comparison to the ones who are playing in 10, 15, 20 years' time. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt.
Well, frankly, I personally can't be bothered with any of it, whether it's women or men. So for me, I don't really care. But I'm really glad that.
I bet you'll care when they lift that cup.
Nah.
No,
I really won't.
Oh, you're a killer. I'll celebrate, I think, because I was heartbroken.
I never thought I'd see a women's game. You know, I'd never thought they'd get to the Euros. I never thought they'd fill Wembley Stadium, and they're going to do that.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you. Good to see you.
A sports journalist. Now, a little reminder that every Wednesday we do hand over our show to you. So today, of course, as we're talking about your views. Look how many views we've got in. We've got lots of them. Our whole show is based on your views. So just to remind you, keep getting your views in because we are going to do the same next Wednesday. To the point at gbnews.uk. What do you want to see us talking about next Wednesday? Just send all your suggestions in and we will try and deliver.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A fresh start to the day for many of us, but a sunnier start, I think, compared with the last couple of days. Still, though, the cloud will build and there will be a few showers by the end of the day in many spots. High pressure's moving in, so that's keeping things mostly settled, but not entirely sunny or entirely dry because, well, the air is still relatively unstable at the moment, and so the air is rising. It's going to produce some cloud through the morning and early part of the afternoon. So after that, a bright start, actually, the cloud tending to build up and fill in, and a few showers developing, particularly through central southern England, the Midlands, northern England, and further showers to come for northern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. Away from any showers, actually, there will be some bright spells and it will feel warm with light winds, 22, 24 Celsius in the south, 18, 19, perhaps 20 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England. Into the evening, and the cloud tends to thicken further across central parts of the country, and further showers will develop. North Midlands into northern England as well as North Wales. They'll move north, and then either side of that, some clear spells. But actually, for many, it's a cloudier night, and as a result, it is a slightly milder night. Temperatures 15 to 16 Celsius in the south first thing, 12 to 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We start off with the early cloud across northern England and North Wales, drifting into southern Scotland, and then further showers will develop across central Scotland, particularly over the Grampians, for example. Also, by the end of the afternoon, some showers start to emerge for West Wales and the southwest. But for many, it's a bright day away from the showers, even a sunny day in the southeast. And the southeast sees predominantly sunny conditions through Friday and Saturday, increasingly warm as well, whilst the rest of the country sees cloud and some showers.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akua on your TV, radio and online.
Now, of course, today is the focus. It's on you and the topics that you want to talk about in our weekly public special, as we do every single Wednesday.
Yes, and make sure you carry on getting in touch with your views at GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll get to those very shortly, but before that, here are the latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning to you. It is 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Commuters are facing significant travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute now over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside of stations across the country. Network Rail says 20% of services are running. Some places have no trains at all. Travellers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. The RMT General Secretary, Mick Lynch, told GB News that government cuts are to blame.
He wants massive cuts. When he wanted the railway workers to keep working and put themselves in a place of danger, in effect, he wanted to talk to us. Now he's using COVID and the effects of COVID as a reason to cut back on the railway. He's cut £2 billion worth of funding from the National Rail, and he's cutting £2 billion from London Underground, in effect. Now that's causing massive disruption, and it's that funding cut that he's responsible for that is causing these disputes. If we can get back to a proper funding level and he allows the companies to negotiate properly, we will get a settlement to this dispute. But he's got the key.
The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us he can't believe the attitude of the unions.
Every one of your viewers watching has paid £600 from their household to keep every railway worker in a job, not even on furlough, during the coronavirus. There are employers and there are unions. They're the only people who can settle these strikes. This is just a game they play in order to divert attention from the fact that they are the ones calling the strikes.
England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alessia Rousseau and Fran Kirby who all scored, ending now a 13-year run of defeats for the team when they get to Final Four of major tournaments. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. MPs are accusing Rishi Sunak of making a U-turn after he pledged to cut VAT on domestic energy bills if he becomes Prime Minister. Unveiling his new winter plan to tackle inflation and the cost of living crisis, the former Chancellor said he'd scrap the VAT if the price cap exceeds £3,000. The announcement's been criticised as Mr Sunak's repeatedly accused Ms Truss of offering unfunded tax cuts. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told GB News he welcomes Rishi Sunak's change of heart.
The reason he's doing that is because he's under pressure. He knows that his tax-raising agenda isn't working. To me, it seems strange that anybody could aspire to the Tory leadership, essentially advocating tax rises, but that's up to him. But I think he suddenly realised that he's on very dodgy ground there and is now flipping back to saying that VAT should be abolished or reduced on energy bills. That's the fairy tale. And I think he's come very late to that party.
The Foreign Secretary's promising to publish police league tables if she wins the leadership race. Liz Truss will also ask forces to cut crime by 20% and, as she says, spend their time investigating real crimes, not Twitter rows and hurt feelings. Ms Truss has said her government would make sure homicide, serious violence and all neighbourhood crime are reduced by a fifth by the end of this Parliament. The US Justice Department is investigating former President Donald Trump in a criminal probe following allegations that he attempted to overturn his 2020 election defeat. It's the Washington Post reporting, and they say investigators have been interviewing former White House officials, including the former Vice President Mike Pence, about attempts to overturn the election result. Donald Trump returned to Washington last night, making his first speech in the Capitol since leaving office. The former president hinted he may run again for office in 2024.
I always say I ran the first time and I won. Then I ran a second time and I did much better. We got millions and millions more votes. And you know what? That's going to be a story for a long time, what a disgrace it was. But we may just have to do it again. We have to straighten out our country.
Marcus Rashford is urging children to find their voices in a special edition of the kids' comic, The Beano. The England and Manchester United striker is encouraging children to build a team of friends to have fun with and speak up for. What's important? For every copy sold of this special edition, 20p is going to be donated to the Marcus Rashford Book Club to help children access reading material. The flight jacket worn by American astronaut Buzz Aldrin on his historic moon mission has sold at auction for over £2 million. The jacket was worn during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. It's now the most valuable American space artefact ever auctioned. It was purchased by an anonymous bidder. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Well, good morning. It's 11:05 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Queer on your TV, radio and online. And it's our viewer show today where we talk about the stories that you want to hear about. So here's what's coming up over the next hour.
Right, well, we've had many messages from you at home about the leadership debates. Of course, last night was halted when the host, Kate McCann, fainted live on air. Now, she is OK, apparently, thankfully. But a few of you have asked whether this system of choosing a Prime Minister is fair on the public. Now, we'll be debating that in the next few minutes.
Yes, and so many of you have also been expressing your frustrations that we have yet more rail strikes going on today and possibly over the summer as well. Well, we'll be looking at why the rail strikes are happening, how long we can expect them to last and what the government is going to do about it.
And as the cost of living squeeze continues to hit the UK, we'll be looking at the uncertainty over the property market and social housing. We've had so many messages from our viewers and listeners about this, so we'll be talking about that later on.
Yes, that's all coming up over the next hour, and you can carry on getting in touch to tell us what you think about what we're discussing today. The email is gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, the second head-to-head Conservative leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss was cut short last night after presenter Kate McCann collapsed on stage. Thankfully, Talk TV says she is now well.
Now, the two candidates to be our next Prime Minister clashed over the NHS, the energy crisis and tax, with Liz Truss accusing ex-Chancellor Rishi Sunak of being morally wrong over his hikes to national insurance and corporation tax.
Yes, well, Kwasi Kwarteng, the Secretary of State for Business, has openly criticised Rishi Sunak's economic plan. He's called it fairy tale economics. Let's take a look at that.
What is fairy tale economics is saying that a VAT cut on energy bills would disproportionately help rich families only 4 months ago, and now saying it's a really good idea now. And the reason he's doing that is because he's under pressure. He knows that his tax-raising agenda isn't working. To me, it seems strange that anybody could aspire to the Tory leadership, essentially advocating tax rises, but that's up to him. But I think he suddenly realised that he's on very dodgy ground there and is now flipping back to saying that VAT should be abolished or reduced on energy bills. That's the fairy tale.
I call it more like an about turn, a U-turn, when you realise you're losing. But so many of you have been getting in touch and have been sharing us your thoughts about the Tory leadership election. And one of you, David, isn't happy about the way we elect our politicians. He says that he wants elections to be held under a more proportional representation system. He says our current options under the limitations present no real possibility of ever having a better party represent us in a real, legitimate and truthful way.
Yes, well, we thought we'd organise a debate for David and ask, should we change our electoral system? And what difference would that make anyway? Well, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Richard Johnson, who's a politics lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, and Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine. Welcome, both of you, to the programme. Richard, you heard our viewer, Dave, there tell us his views about why he doesn't think our current electoral system is fair. What are your views on that?
I think there are some good philosophical reasons why we might want to maintain the current electoral system. For me, it comes down to questions of clarity of responsibility and democratic accountability. So what I mean by that is, at the moment, when the Conservatives or Labour put up a manifesto in the election, that's a manifesto that's public before the election, the public can see it, the media will scrutinise them over it. And if they win a majority in the House of Commons, they basically have no excuses. They have to implement that agenda. Under a proportional representation system, what's written in the manifesto isn't really worth the paper it's printed on, because those are just going to be bargaining chips for a post-election coalition deal. And at the end of that parliament, when we have hung parliaments, as we inevitably would under proportional representation, the parties can just say, oops, sorry, we had to make a deal, we couldn't implement our programme. Of course, Nick Clegg even recorded a song about how sorry he was when he had to deal away Lib Dem promises on scrapping tuition fees and protecting public services. So that was an exceptional circumstance under first past the post, but it would become the norm under proportional representation. That would be my big concern.
Christine Jardine, what's your view on this then?
Well, I think that's a very narrow view of what proportional representation actually gives us. And it's all based on this idea of only one voice has a right to say you only have one voice in politics. And for democracy to be strong, the strongest it can be, every voice needs to be heard. And we shouldn't have a situation where only the party which wins a majority of seats, not necessarily have a majority of votes, it doesn't even necessarily have the support of the majority of the people in the country, gets to dictate what the policy is. That is wrong. And we see it in Scotland, where we have three different types of electoral systems for each election. We have a single transferable vote in the councils for multi-member wards. We have the D'Hondt list system plus constituencies plus a top-up list in the Parliament. And we have first past the post in a general election. And what we found in the last general election was that the Scottish National Party got 45% of the vote, but 80% of the seats under first past the post. So theirs is the voice which is heard. And that is what we see across the UK. We see one voice, the voice which wins a majority of seats being the voice in government. Now, there are seats all over the country where the Liberal Democrats are in second place, or the Labour Party for that matter. They're in second place, and that voice is not being heard. The voice of other people is just as important as the one that gets the majority of seats. And that is what is missing without PR. One of the reasons I became a Liberal Democrat is because my parents were Conservatives, and they lived in a seat which never returned anything but a Labour MP. So they felt that they did not have a voice. That is wrong, that anyone feels in a modern democracy that they don't have a voice.
Just before you go on, just because some people might not fully understand what proportional representation is. So either one of you, who wants to explain it?
Let's go to you, Richard, since you're the politics lecturer.
So there are lots of different forms of proportional representation, but PR systems generally try to make the share of seats that a party wins in the legislature align as closely as possible with the share of the votes that it got in the general election, whereas the first past the post system means that there's individual competitions in each constituency in the country, and the candidate who gets the most seats in each different constituency is the person who gets elected. PR systems tend to lead to more parties getting elected to the legislature, but that means that it's less likely that any party will have a majority, which means that PR systems tend to produce coalition governments, whereas first past the post tends to produce majoritarian government.
Okay. And Christine, I do want to ask you about that, because I understand that one of the benefits, I suppose, of proportional representation and power sharing, so to speak, is that compromise and that feeling of having the wider population represented better. However, isn't it the case that a government elected under first past the post, where there is one governing party, can crack on and get things done quicker and deliver for the public in a more sort of efficient way?
Looking at our government at the moment, which was elected on first past the post, the answer would be no. It hasn't cracked on and get anything done. They're fighting at the moment about policy. You have divisions within parties as well. So, what we see at the moment is a government, we've got a zombie government at the moment, which, hasn't dealt effectively with the economic impact of the pandemic. We have now people pushed to the point of strikes up and down the country. That's the government's fault. We've got families struggling because the government isn't able to make clear decisions on the economy. We've now got a contest between two members of the same party who disagree vehemently about policy. So to say you elect one policy, you elect one party, you get clear government, we have the evidence at the moment that is just not the case.
Well, don't you think, though, that those who wanted to change are those who see that it will benefit in their favour? Because that's what I'm seeing. People want it to change because they realise it will benefit them, rather than...
Isn't that the case? Isn't that the case with all change? Is that people look at the situation and say, do you know what? It would be better for us if it changed. It would be better for everyone.
But for your part,
if it
say, for
changed.
example,
and the people who want to hold on to it are the people who have an unfair advantage at the moment.
Yeah, but I suppose if you are the party, so for example, the Liberal Democrats, this would be beneficial to them. But as a whole, do you actually believe that if we run this country with sort of different pacts and, because I haven't seen us do that sort of government well. We had the similar thing before. We had the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Party, who were sort of like this sort of lib-lab thing going on, and it wasn't good. No decisions were really made. I don't know whether this is in the interest of the country.
It was a lot better than we've got at the moment, frankly, because you didn't have, you had to make a decision which was based on consensus. And we had this in Scotland for two administrations. We had the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats working together. And you got government which was based on consensus of what was best for the most people. And you had influential voices from different viewpoints, from different points of society. And, anybody who runs anything will tell you that that's the best way to proceed, that you don't just have one voice, that you find a consensus. What benefits most people? And that is what you get when you have PR. Now, the reason that Liberal Democrats are in favour of it is not because it would benefit us, but because it would benefit the people of the country.
You get a hung parliament,
because
Christine.
it would have consensual government.
Richard, I just want to bring you in because I could see you shaking your head. Tell us why you're shaking your head.
So fringe parties and minor parties love PR because not only does it give them a greater share of the seats in the legislature, but it gives them a disproportionate say in the formation of governments. And that's the key thing. So the PR reformers talk about the legislature, but it also has a big impact on the formation of the executive, the government. And quite frankly, I can quite understand why the Liberal Democrats would want PR, because it would make them effectively kingmakers after every election. Right? We haven't had a general election in this country since 1945 where a party has won a majority of the popular vote, meaning that there would almost always be a hung parliament. And the Lib Dems have shown, as has just been said, a willingness to go in with the Conservatives sometimes with Labour. And so what this means, actually, when people talk about fairness, I think it's very unfair that it would mean that the Lib Dems, much like the Liberals in Germany, are the ones who decide the government. So after the election, after the people have had the say, it's who they can sell themselves to the highest bidder. Is it going to be a Conservative or Labour? And that's one of the real concerns I have about it. It's not just about who's in the legislature, but actually who's in the executive, who's in government.
And Christine, very final word to you, Christine.
The problem. You
Very
just
final word to you.
illustrated the problem. You said that there hasn't been a government in this country since the war that has won the popular vote. So what you're saying is that we've had governments since the war that the majority of people didn't want. Is that fair?
Well, I don't think we'll resolve our differences over the next few minutes, sadly. But I do thank you both for joining us for that very civil debate. Dr. Richard Johnson, there, politics lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, and Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine.
Yeah, no, that's tricky because proportional representation, it often means that a swing party, a party in the middle, can swing the votes.
Yeah.
And we end up with the system, well, we'll have a pact with you and we'll have a pact with you. And we might not actually get, the public might not get what they want. I think it gives too much power.
Yeah, I think if we had I'm OK with first past the post under the condition that we have a very effective opposition. I think that's what's sort of been missing over the last few years, that the country almost feels like it's been just governed by one entity and nobody else is challenging that entity.
Well, they're challenging themselves, though. I think if you get, like, this government here, they've been their own opposition, actually. They might as well have been the Labour Party. The Labour Party hasn't needed to do anything, which it hasn't done anything, frankly. But so it doesn't necessarily flow that just because you have the big majority, because that's not what's happened here. The infighting is horrendous.
I mean, they've had a massive majority.
But I didn't like what happened before either. Do you remember with Brexit and Theresa May had that tiny majority, and then there was also, it was kind of like a hung parliament, and she was a minority government, and it just doesn't work.
What a mess, eh? What a mess. That's the bottom line. Let us know what you think, GBVs at gbnews.uk. Well, after the break, the latest round of national rail strikes is well underway, with only 20% of train journeys expected to go ahead today. This will cause massive disruption for commuters, which we'll discuss after this quick break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:23 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akua on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yeah, don't forget to download the free GB News app as well. You can stream the show on YouTube too. Now, our summer of disruption continues as we face another day, yes, another one, of rail strikes today. This time it's train services operating at just 20% capacity and all operators are affected.
Yes, well, more than 40,000 RMT union workers at Network Rail and 14 train companies are walking out, leaving thousands of passengers stranded at stations across the country.
Earlier, we spoke to Mick Lynch, he's the General Secretary of the RMT, about how the government could stop the strikes.
These companies, all 15 of them, are telling us that the changes that we will have in the future mean it will be cheaper to employ the workers on the railway. And that's not acceptable.
Do you want to reform and modernise? Does the union want that?
We constantly reform and modernise. We introduce new technology right across the railway all of the time. And we can get to an agreement on that if the companies are prepared to fund the changes properly. We can't just have imposed changes that make our members' working lives worse. So we'll get an agreement in the end. I'm sure we can do that. But it'd be better if Grant Shapps allowed that change to happen, allowed the companies to negotiate properly and stop political posturing around this issue and trying to take on the RMT and the other trade unions for the sake of the Tory party electoral leadership race.
Well, for more, let's go to our Scotland reporter, Davy Donaldson, who is up in Glasgow for us. What's the situation where you are, Davy?
Yeah, I'm here at Buchanan Street bus station where a lot of people have obviously decided to use the bus instead because that's really the only option for some people. But earlier on today I was outside Glasgow Central Station. It was eerily quiet. There's only 5 services running across the Central Belt across Scotland today, so no trains further north. Obviously if you're in Perth, Dundee, Inverness and Aberdeen, you've got no trains whatsoever. So and only the 5 services, as I say, running here, so really bad, and only 10% of trains running across Scotland. So it's an even worse situation here. We've also just had the ScotRail dispute resolved last week. The timetable returned to normal only last week, and here we are once again in a situation where people can't get to work, they can't get about their business. Earlier on today I spoke to Gordon Martin, who's the RMT regional organiser.
Well, it's about pay, but it's also about a number of other things, including, and in particular, threats to jobs. You know, at Network Rail they're looking to slash a significant number of maintenance workers, they're looking to slash the maintenance regime, and at the train operating companies they're looking to close all the booking offices and slash other jobs. So really it's about safety in the railway and as well about pay. This is the 3rd year that most of these guys on strike haven't had a pay offer of any description.
It probably makes it even harder given the situation we have here in Scotland that, you know, ScotRail workers got their pay increase.
Well, I mean, they're totally different situations, right enough, but this is this is a UK-wide situation where they've not had a pay offer, or a suitable pay offer. They've not had a pay rise for getting into the 3rd year. At ScotRail, that's different. You know, there's been pay rises, whether they're no inflation proofed or not, there's another argument. But certainly, this is the 3rd year across the board for the railway. No pay offers, but more importantly, a tax on jobs, terms and conditions.
And we've got a situation here today. I was just in Central Station there where we've got only 5 train services running across the whole of Scotland, which is obviously far from ideal.
Oh, it's an absolute disgrace, and I lay the blame fairly and squarely at the feet of the UK government. The UK government are dictating the whole agenda here to the bosses, the senior management in the railway, who should actually have the spine to stand up to them and defend the rail industry, but their salary relies on them not having a spine. Their salary relies on them just doing the government's bidding, and unfortunately we've got an impasse now. So the UK government need to fully get involved to resolve this, or completely stay out it and allow free collective bargaining in line with our agreements with Network Rail and all these train operating companies.
So, Dave.
So there we are, Gordon Martin, the regional organisers for RMT, calling on the government to sort out this dispute. It's going to get worse tonight. Train services here finish at 6:30, and ScotRail encouraging people to get earlier trains than that. You would imagine tomorrow, due to the networking problems as well, network on the tracks, that there'll be some delays in the morning as well. So you would imagine that this place over my shoulder, Buchanan Street bus station, is going to be pretty busy later on tonight and tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Davey, for that up there in Glasgow. He is at a bus station where obviously replacement bus services are running for people who are unable to get on those trains. Now, for more on how to avoid the chaos today is travel expert Sally Gethin, who joins us in the studio. Good morning, Sally. Very frustrating, isn't it, for people just trying to get on with their day? What is the best way to kind of go about your day without having to face all these disruptions?
Well, the first rule is to avoid travel by rail if you possibly can, and work from home if that's possible. But, for example, if you have already got a ticket and you're worried about that and can you use it again, there are lots of options for you to be able to do that. The train operating companies are saying that they will provide alternative dates for you to travel, especially up till the 2nd of August. And there is a temporary rail timetable at nationalrail.co.uk if you want to double check, if you absolutely have to get away. But obviously this has come as a huge blow. I mean, the whole travel picture in the UK now is very complicated, because whatever you try to do, you seem to be scuppered. So if it's not the trains, then it's the ports, the ferries. The roads are busier than usual due to the summer holidays.
And fuel is more expensive, of course, if you are using
Yes, of course, the fuel. And as we all know, there are also problems at airports too.
Can I just ask you, just to clarify, so the rail strikes are going ahead for 24 hours from earlier today, but there will inevitably be disruptions over the next couple of days
so
after that?
it's not a full 24 hours officially. So it's really from this morning through to this evening.
Okay.
But it has a knock-on effect, obviously. And I think there are some logistics with moving trains around as well after the industrial action has finished, which will create this knock-on effect. And they're not expected to be back to the normal working efficiency till midday tomorrow.
See, now that's very irritating. But then they're now also talking about tube strikes as well. I mean, these are on the way too. So we've got rail, we've got ferries, issues at Dover. It's just spreading everywhere, right?
Well, I was going to say it's a double whammy with the tubes in London, but actually you could say it's a triple, quadruple whammy in all regards. But yes, this tube strike, which is scheduled for the 19th of August, that's going to come slap bang in the middle of the other strike dates planned for rail on the 18th and the 20th of August. So it's just like a domino effect. You have one problem and then another and another. So, yes, and that's a rather sort of strange situation where they're striking because they don't know what the plans are in the long run for TfL. There's a blame game going on that front too.
Is there not a worry that we get so used to this sort of nonsense that in the end we actually are able to cope with it? It's a bit like COVID, people work from home, In the end, the impact becomes less and less.
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously it depends what your journey is going to be. And a lot of people do need to plan ahead, especially if you're going on holiday and you've got children. It's really important you know where you stand. So I would say really check the fine print of everything. I should add that there's a passenger charter also on each train operator's website. I would say also with air tickets to really check with your air carrier and on their websites particularly, but also go to the regulators, which is the CAA. There's lots of information. It just takes more time to inform yourself.
When people are booking, though, or buying a ticket of some description, is there a particular clause they should look out for so that if something like this happens, they are covered and they can get their money back? Or is there any specific thing that they should look out for?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, if it's more of a longer break you're going on, definitely take out travel insurance. And if it's a holiday, an all-inclusive travel package, you're much more protected. I think also you do, like I said before, have to read the fine print. There's nothing that can totally future-proof your travel in the kind of environment we've got now. It's very unstable. And the problem is that there's no end in sight. There's this long question mark, and it creates a lot of instability around travel. And it's very bad news for the economy as well, because, of course, it impacts the way goods
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
travel as well as passengers.
Well, Sally, Gethin, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this very pertinent issue at the moment, which is going to carry on, sadly, I think, into the summer. But after the break, it now seems harder than ever before to get onto the property ladder. But how have house prices changed? And what about people who need social housing? Well, our East Midlands reporter Hollis spoke to a woman who bought her house for just £250, and she's actually over 100 years old as well, so you won't want to miss her interview, his interview with her. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
Good morning, it's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Commuters are facing travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running. Some places have no trains at all. England are through to the Women's Euros final after beating Sweden 4-0 last night. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alessia Rousseau and Fran Kirby who all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats for the team when they get to the final four of major tournaments. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. The second head-to-head leadership debate between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak came to an abrupt end last night after the host of the debate collapsed. Kate McCann fainted whilst the show was live on air, forcing Talk TV to cut away from the studio. Talk TV says Kate McCann is fine, but the rest of the debate was cancelled. Before the incident, the candidates had clashed over tax, with Ms Truss criticising Rishi Sunak of hitting the public by raising national insurance. A McDonald's cheeseburger is no longer 99p. The fast food giants increased the price for the first time in more than 14 years. They've blamed rising costs and inflation. It's now 20 pence more expensive, coming in at £1.19. In a statement, McDonald's says a number of items on sale in their UK restaurants will go up from 10 to 20 pence. It's the latest company to announce increasing prices after inflation hit a 40-year high. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.207 and 1.190 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,428 and 11 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 38 past 11 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Nana Queer on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, it seems harder than ever before to get onto the property ladder. The average UK house price is now £258,000 or £81,000. And in the last year, the cost of living crisis has pushed the prices up even further.
Yes, well, tomorrow, the Office for National Statistics, there you go, releases new figures on housing, affordability and disposable income.
And as we wait for those numbers, we've actually sent our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, to meet 104-year-old great-great-grandmother. She's lived her entire life in the same £250 Nottinghamshire home.
Elsie Alcock has lived a very full life, 104 years to be precise, and every minute of it she's been right here on Barker Street in Huthwaite. Born upstairs in June 1918, before the end of the First World War, she's made a lifetime of memories here.
Oh, that's me up backyard with my first two grandchildren.
Living with her son Raymond, who's 75, Elsie knows every inch of the home. So much so that she can walk around in the dark.
He always says when I'm going upstairs, put a light on, Mother. What for? It's funny, but I can't every step I go up.
Elsie's coal miner dad first rented the Nottinghamshire home for 7 shillings and 6pence, and when he died, Elsie and her husband Bill decided to buy it. The cost was £250, money they didn't have. But the local council helped the couple with the cash. Elsie still has the book she used to pay off the 10-year loan.
CWA Alcock and E Alcock. Monthly payment was £2.16 and a penny.
In today's money, Elsie paid about £5,000 for the house. But if she sold it now, the 2-bed terraced house would fetch around £80,000. Housing is one of Britain's biggest challenges. The government needs to build 300,000 new homes a year, but is falling short. Prices are soaring. Low stock is one of the reasons for the rise. This week, the Office for National Statistics is releasing its figures for housing affordability, analysing prices and income. Near to where Elsie lives, the District Council is trying to replenish its social housing stock. But Councillor Tom Hollis says the right to buy scheme, which means tenants can eventually buy their council homes, makes the task challenging.
All this estate was built by the council. Now we have less than 40%, and 22,000 houses across Ashfield has now become less than 7,000 directly owned by the council. Yet we've still got just the same demand. We want to give those people good places to rent, but when somebody can buy the house, you lose that stock forever.
In June, Boris Johnson promised to extend the right to buy scheme. His resignation and a new Prime Minister may alter those plans. Back on Barker Street, Elsie's home becomes worth more every day, but the memories she's made here are priceless. Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Bless her.
Oh, I love
Little
that.
Elsie with her house. It's lovely, isn't it?
I love that. I want to know what Elsie is eating. And she looks fantastic. She's 104.
Lovely eyes, lovely eyes.
Lovely eyes. Clearly not wearing glasses. Her hair's looking fantastic. She's just...
hair.
I want to know what her
Better hair
secret
than me.
is. We were talking...
Never get to see it.
The things Nana says about her hair in the breaker is quite something.
It's interesting, though, the way house prices are, because I think nowadays you can get, you get 5.5 times your income, but then in some instances that can go up to 8 or as far as 10 times. And that's got to tell you something, that isn't right. And then somebody who's renting a property could end up paying more for the rental than a mortgage, but won't be allowed to have a mortgage.
Yeah.
So there's an issue there, but they shouldn't be allowed to
I do
sell
always
their
find
capital.
it contradictory and very ironic that you could be renting for 10 years, 20 years and have paid your rent on time every time for 1 or 2 decades. But you go to the bank and you try and get a mortgage, and if you don't have a deposit, they're like, oh no, sorry, we don't trust that you'll pay us our money back. Well, hang on a minute, I've been paying rent every time. So I think that surely there has to be a more creative way to prove that somebody is a very reliable person to actually sell a house to, rather than just the fact they can produce a lump sum of cash.
Ridiculous. Well, I'll tell you what, joining us now is Nicholas Boys-Smith, Director of Create Streets, a social enterprise encouraging urban homes in terraced streets. Now, thank you very much for joining us. How important do you think it is to deal with the housing crisis now rather than delay new builds?
Thank you very much. I mean, it's existential, and what a moving little vignette that was from Elsie. I just did a quick calculation. When Elsie was 8 years old, that was the last time that the same proportion of people born 30 years ago had the same proportion of owned homes as we do now. So we're back to 1926. And so the housing affordability crisis is above all, it's generational. Younger people now paying about 30% of their income on rent, and it is rent, normally not mortgage, of course, as opposed to about 10% 30 years ago. So there's an absolute crisis of home ownership and affordability, which is marching its way through the generations, particularly but not exclusively in the southeast. So we can't afford to wait. We have to keep building. When you look at the ratio of homes to households, we've got the tightest in Europe. Got actually fewer homes than there are households without taking account of suppressed household formation. The average in Europe is about 1.12, and in the UK it's about 0.99. So the need is statistically unarguable.
Yeah, on breakfast, we spoke to David Gauke, who was I don't think he's a Tory MP anymore. He had a bit of a run-in with Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers.
No, I don't think so, no.
Back in the day, if you remember. But he was saying he wouldn't trust Liz Truss necessarily to become Prime Minister, because he thinks she would just blow up the rule book on lots of things. In a way, isn't it a good option to have somebody who will blow up the rule book on the way we've been doing things for years, on things like housing? Because whatever we've been doing, it clearly hasn't worked. We need a complete revolution for how we deal with these things.
Well, it's certainly true that what we're doing now isn't working. I'm not going to comment on what Liz Truss would or wouldn't do. I'm not expert to do that. But I think it's important to understand the way in which regulation and planning works. Because, I mean, both the right and the left make a bit of a category error on this. On the right, it's assumed that sort of planning started in 1947 with nasty Mr. Attlee, and on the left, it's assumed that, well, the same, but nice Mr. Attlee. In fact, we've always regulated the built environment. If you imagine I live in house A and you live in house B, and it's the 12th century, and I have a thatched roof, and I burn my house down, I will probably burn your house down as well. So we've been regulating what we can build, like no thatch in London since the 12th century, for many hundreds of years, and the Romans did and the Greeks did. So it's, if you like, it's part of the irreducible core of what the state does. What's gone wrong in this country, particularly, is that we've stopped regulating in a predictable, simple way, and we've started planning in a complicated way. So we put all the onus on what's called development control. That's do you win planning permission, quite a telling phrase, to win it, as opposed to does this follow the rule book. There will always be rules in what you can and can't build, because there are quite hard to escape externalities on your neighbourhood and on requirements for water or whatever it might be. But what we do need to do is make a simple, more predictable system, and that will make it much, much easier, not just to rely on the volume house builders. We are outrageously, crazily reliant on the big volume house builders, and we've got, by some margin, the smallest self-build, custom-build, SME, local house builder market, pretty much in the West. So I think it's less throw away the rule book. It's more have a much simpler, clearer, more comprehensible rule book that doesn't act as a barrier to entry through high pre-planning costs and risk. So it's a complicated answer, but it's I think quite an important one.
So Nicholas, Richard, Chris, who's a GBNews viewer, got in touch. He said, I live in a rural area and thousands of homes are being built, supposedly affordable, right? But the cheapest is 450k. How do they expect people to afford this?
Well, I mean, there's no simple answer to that, I'm afraid. The nature of the places we've been creating and their affordability from people around here has gone systemically wrong over the last 30, 40 years. 2% of people trust developers. I think from memory, 7% trust the planning system. And if people don't think that they or their neighbours can live in these houses or will benefit from the place that's being created or extended or changed in whatever way, then 9 times out of 10, they will oppose the new housing, even when they recognise, as most people do, that new housing is required. So we've got to get back. I talk of moving from a sort of vicious circle of parasitic, unaffordable development into a virtuous circle of regenerative development. Unless people have confidence, they know what it's going to look like, they know where it will be, they know that they or the neighbours or people like them or people they know will be able to afford to live there. Unless you get into that virtuous circle, people will continue to oppose housing in practice, even though they say they don't in principle.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Nicholas Boy-Smith, Director of Create Streets, a social enterprise encouraging urban homes in terrace streets.
Yeah, Create Streets is actually one of my favourite Twitter pages, actually, because what they do is they show how you can build homes that are modern, but that look good as well, that aren't these horrible sort of brutalist monstrosities that look like they're plucked straight out from the 70s. You can build high-density homes in streets, in cities, but actually make them look good as well, because I hate seeing tower blocks. They're just the ugliest things.
Well, they serve a purpose. It's just they need to be built properly, don't they? I mean, it's just, it's not on when they have dodgy cladding and all that sort of nonsense. As long as they're built properly, I think they're acceptable.
Yeah.
I'll do a quick view here. Colin says, why is it OK for someone to pay £800 in rent when they can buy a property for approximately £500 per month? If they could get a mortgage, why not allow people to use their housing benefit towards a mortgage? That's a point that you make.
Yeah, that's the point I was making. Most people who can afford to rent and pay their rent on time every month are people who are even more reliable in terms of being able to have mortgages. Just because somebody's able to produce a lump sum that their parents probably gave them anyway, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily lower risk in terms of long-term mortgage prospects.
Although that's a bit unfair that lump sum parents gave them anyway. Some of us saved that.
Yeah, some of us do save, but I know plenty of people who've had their parents give them a few tens of thousands of pounds. Why should they be more? Why should they be more sort of trustworthy for a mortgage than people who've saved or people who haven't saved and are renting? It doesn't make sense to me. Let's go to another view. John says councils need to build more when they sell off their stock. It's not just council stock that's low, it's houses in general. And that's what we were talking about earlier with the Labour councillor, actually, who we were saying that because council houses are sold at below market value, what they get is not necessarily enough to sort of build more houses of market value and of sort of like-for-like houses. So they end up not having enough cash, essentially, to replenish that stock.
Well, keep all those thoughts coming. We always like to hear from you. But now something on all of our minds right now is the state of the economy and what the government spend taxpayers' money on.
Yes, well, it was a big talking point on the debate between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak on Monday night, with many worried about their children's futures as the nation's debt increases. Should we be dealing with the issue now? Actually, I think it's Rishi Sunak accused Liz Truss of sort of toying with our children and our grandchildren's future by sort of delaying the debt and paying it off later.
Well, they've got in touch to say overspending has been a real issue for this government. Tackling the nation's debt must be a priority for the new Prime Minister.
Yes, well, what impact will this have on future generations? Should the government act now or just let it snowball? Is there a middle, in-between kind of policy that they can find there? By joining us now is economist Jonathan Davis. Thanks for coming on, Jonathan. This has been a key point of contention, hasn't it, between these two Tory leadership hopefuls. In your view, who has the sounder policy on how to deal with debt?
Neither of them. They both want as much debt as possible. They are politicians for the last 30 years. So that's all forms of politicians, for want of a better phrase. State debt, corporate debt, household debt has absolutely exploded. And the only reason why, since the Conservatives have been in charge for the last 12 years, the only reason why they've been able to keep the plate spinning is because, of course, the cost of borrowing, because the government pays interest on debt as well, has been kept at practically 0% for over the last decade. Well, now that we are in an era of high and rising inflation, interest rates, of course, have been rising for the last 6 or 12 months, and government now has to pay some 2% per annum to service the debt, to pay the interest, just like we all pay interest on our debts. Thus, the cost of borrowing has absolutely exploded, and that is materially affecting government finances. Thus, you think they're going to cut spending? No, they're not. What they're going to do is borrow even more to pay off the existing debt and then borrow more. They have no intention whatsoever of changing the current situation. They are quite happy to let inflation ride. They want inflation because that's going to inflate away the debt and impoverish the bottom 90%.
Wow, you paint a very stark picture there, crikey. So then, if they both got the wrong approach, what would your approach be? What should they be doing?
Well, they should be slashing spending. Everybody knows that bureaucracy has run riot in this country over the last generation. Look at the quangos. Look at the National Health Service. 1.4 million people work in health care in the UK. Only a half of them are medical professionals, for goodness sake. The fact is, the politicians have been, I've been writing about this for years, they have wanted inflation to happen. Inflation doesn't happen by magic. It happens by design. They stopped the oil and gas companies from finding and producing oil and gas. Thus, we've seen, for example, this year, home energy costs up 50% a year. The cost of fuel at the pump has gone from £1 a litre a couple of years ago to £2 a litre. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who have seen their earnings increase by the 20, 30, 40% that the cost of living has gone up.
Well,
so
Jonathan,
the politicians...
Jonathan,
no, I must make this point.
Go on then, make it.
The politicians need to slash spending. They need to cut it by a third. And I know that will create an economic problem in the short term, but only an economy in deflation prospers. In inflation, it goes to the rubbish tip.
Well, there's a nice little ending there, Jonathan. Well, listen, Jonathan, but I think you're slightly wrong, because Liz Truss, there was a document that was leaked that apparently she does plan to, and it did say that she was urging Dominic Cumming to scrap hundreds of woke civil service posts. She also called on getting rid of all those extra jobs. She's, so one of them is talking about reducing the bureaucracy and cutting down the red tape. I haven't heard it from Rishi Sunak's lips at all, and she has talked about the NHS as well.
So that's a 1% cut. I'm telling you, it will do absolutely nothing.
But she also talked about slashing that civil service. So I'm with you. I think they could cut a lot of spending. They've got to do that in conjunction with their unemployment.
Yes, very finally, I do want to ask you, obviously you just said there that they need to slash spending by a third. Where would they slash that spending? Because when people hear slash spending, they hear our public services are going to get much worse than they are now.
Yeah. Well, again, you guys in the media, you always focus on the short term rather than the long term.
No, we don't.
You actually, by inference, you're actually supporting no material change. That's the problem. So
we're just asking you questions based on what you've told us. I'm asking you. You've said slash spending. How do we slash spending?
I'll give you an example. One example I saw just yesterday on Twitter. By the way, Mercy, you should have a look at my Twitter account. You might enjoy that one as well as the other one on property. I saw that in one district of the NHS, they want to bring in a manager for diversity.
It's ridiculous.
For £108,000 a year. One district.
We agree.
Listen, that by 150 districts.
Listen, if you've watched anything here, you'll know, Richard, that we don't agree with any of that. We should scrap diversity inclusion. Liz Truss was saying exactly that. She said get rid of a lot of quangos. She said reduce the civil service. She also is looking at the NHS, which is overspending, way too much management. Most people would agree with that. Now, let's hope they do that. Jonathan, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on GB News.
Yes, well, that is it from us here at To The Point. But don't go away, because up next is The Briefing with Gloria De Piero, and we will be back with you tomorrow.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out